Welcome to A Flash of Beauty, the podcast, an audio experience dedicated to the further exploration of Bigfoot and the people Bigfoot has revealed itself to. What started as a documentary of personal narrative encounter stories and expert testimony has now shifted into a deeper inquiry into the forever changed lives of those that have witnessed firsthand this hidden truth. My name is Tobe Johnson, co-producer of Flash of Beauty Bigfoot Revealed. Join me along with the crew and creators of this doc, director Brett Eichenberger, producer Jill Rimmon-Snyder, and cinematographer Michael Ferry, as we go back into the trees to sit down once again with each guest in search of the truth, no matter how strange. All right, welcome back to another episode of A Flash of Beauty, the podcast. My name's Tobe Johnson, and with me again here is director Brett Eichenberger, director of Flash of Beauty, and producer Jill Rimmon-Snyder. Hello, guys. And
hey,
girls.
How are you this evening, Tobe?
I'm doing good.
Good.
Now,
I'm excited about Henry.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be said here and not a lot of time to say. But what I can tell you is that Henry has been an influence on my Sasquatch research since about 2007 time frame when I heard him on a little show called Night Callers Radio. And ever since then, I've just been following up on a lot of his research. And it all started with a book that Henry is the author of called The Spirit of Seatco, which I talk about quite a bit when I do podcasts. Brett, you probably heard me talk about it. But beyond him being an author, you know, Henry is a legitimate scientist that has worked with the indigenous people up the Columbia River Gorge and a wealth of knowledge as it comes to the forefathers of Bigfoot research, which, you know, to get him in the doc, the first iteration of Flash of Beauty Bigfoot Revealed was a major score as far as I was concerned. And so I'll pass it over to you, Brett, regarding your experience with it and with
yeah.
working
So
with Henry.
I mean, we were elated to have Henry in the documentary because Henry's one of those people out there that doesn't, you know, there's no question in his mind about whether Bigfoot is real or not. Henry knows Bigfoot is real. And part of the reason why Henry knows Bigfoot is real is because of what he's done for the tribes in the Columbia Gorge area and across the country for that matter. And so Henry has been in this unique position that very, very, very few outsiders, if you will, find themselves in. And he has seen firsthand and he has been given knowledge that really nobody else gets. And so there's a lot of things that Henry probably knows that he will never tell, but I do know that we do know from our interview that Henry knows for a fact. I mean, he's seen Bigfoot. He's heard stories about Bigfoot. He's seen extraordinary videos of Bigfoot. And we're going to talk about all of that stuff today. And we're going to start teasing some of the things we're going to talk to Henry about in the sequel, The Paranormal Bigfoot. So this is going to be a really, really interesting interview. And I know Henry can be a little long-winded, but stick with it because he's going someplace and he's really proving his point. So fascinating guy. I'm excited about it.
Well, Jill, tell me what your thoughts are on working with Henry. Even though it was a brief process in the film, I feel like there's going to be a lot more of Henry in the future, not only with the sequel, but just as far as a really interesting read on Sasquatch.
Yeah, I mean, so for the initial interview, I was on the phone with him for at least an hour and a half. And it wasn't just talking about his relationship and what he learned with the tribes, you know, is also just his introduction to the world of Sasquatch. But the stuff I'm really excited about from the original interview that we did not put into the documentary, we've been sitting on for the sequel. He, like Brett said, he kind of touches on some of that that we are going to explore and feature heavily in the Flash of Beauty sequel. And that's the stuff that's been keeping me up at night and has been just making my brain, the little hamster on the wheel is just about to run off the tracks. It's yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, Henry is he's he's a poet in so many ways. He has this I mean, we're talking about Bigfoot, granted, but it comes out as a musician might deliver it. And Henry, being a musician and a drummer, he's kind of caught between, you know, the scientist and the musician, and in between this is this what I would call spiritual world of Sasquatch. And so you're about to hear that conversation unfold, and you know, have patience for, you know, the cookie crumbs being laid out for you. That is the way Henry's talking, or maybe musical notes slightly off key, so you can do some research on you know, on how Henry's speaking. But um, it's it's maybe for a selective crowd to meet someone like Henry and hang out with him. I think that's the way he likes it, and not everybody should be taking the red pill with Henry Franzoni. I just think that that's probably the truth. In my case, gobble, gobble, gobble. It's all good.
Yeah.
I want some more of those red pills, Henry. And so that's what you're going to get. You're going to get a lot of red pills here with Henry Franzoni. Anything else before we cut to the interview, guys?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I want to give the audience something really cool and really special that nobody knows about. We haven't talked about it publicly yet, and I'm gonna reveal it here on this podcast. One of the very first things that happened to us when we were making the film that was a little out of the ordinary, and I'll go back and say that throughout the entire production of A Flash of Beauty, we had some just odd things happen, whether they were coincidental or they were physical or what have you, or sightings or whatnot. We had some very interesting things, but in the post-production process of A Flash of Beauty, I was working on what's called the color grade of the film. So when we, not to get too technical on everybody out there, but you know, when we go through the color grading process of the movie, it means that, you know, we shoot this in kind of raw, you know, and so the image actually looks pretty bland and washed out and almost kind of black and white. And then we'll go through and we'll adjust the color levels to make them perfect. It's kind of like the guy at Home Depot. You give them a number and then like mix the paint that you want on your wall and they get it right. It's kind of a similar process. And we use wheels and we use all kinds of different tools to do it. And one of the tools that we use is called a waveform, vectorscopes, parades. And what I'll do is I'll go through and I'll start off with a color balance. So what that means is I have red, green, and blue. And I want to make sure that those red, green, and blues are all equal. That way I know that the color is the way that it should look, in other words. And when I was doing that process, I look over at the parade and I look at where the colors are and how they're reading based on the camera image. And throughout the entire documentary and throughout my entire career, whenever I've used this particular application, it's a mess. It just looks like waves, you know, like audio waves or something that you would see, sonic waves or something. But when I got to Henry, his waveform was reading as a Bigfoot. It was reading as a Bigfoot. And what was so fascinating about that, it was clearly, unmistakably a figure. And the most prominent feature of this figure were the large feet. And technically speaking, I can explain some of it and why that parade is reading that way with the color forms, but I can't explain why it looked exactly like a Bigfoot. So we'll flash that up. Hopefully you're seeing it now. So you can kind of take a look at what, this isn't faked. This actually happened. And it absolutely, positively blew me away. And I sent it to Henry and he thought I made it up. I said, no, this really happened. This really happened. So just a little tidbit there that's now public.
It's a perfect Franzoni moment. All right. Well, without further ado, from somewhere in the murky fog of Washington State along the Columbia River Gorge, we give you our interview with Henry Franzoni. welcome to Flash of Beauty, the podcast. Today we have a special guest, and of course, in tow, the director of Flash of Beauty, Brett Eichenberger, and the producer, Jill Remensnyder, and myself, Tobe Johnson, of the book, The Al Moon Lab, A Paranormal Experiment. Today's guest is none other than Henry Franzoni, author of Spirit of Seatco, an all-around kick-ass guy, kick-ass drummer of such albums as Caveman Shoe Store, which I was just talking about. Henry, thanks for coming on the podcast. Now, I mean, there's lots of ways we could start this out here. I could get into the fact that Henry Franzoni is kind of the catalyst for me running into the woods headlong and getting in this Bigfoot mess back circa 2007 timeframe. But, you know, you're in the documentary and you had a lot of information to share, Henry. So I'm going to pass the torch to Brett here regarding maybe some of the questions you had about his book, The Spirit of Seatco, which we don't get into the doc, but it is it's an important book about Bigfoot. And Brett, what was your question?
I want to talk about the Seatco, and we didn't have enough time to get into it in the film. So maybe you could start off by explaining to the audience what that is. It's not a baseball stadium in Seattle.
No,
I'll just start there.
It's an old Chinook word that actually comes from, well, there was a language here, the Chinook jargon, and it was a mix of French and English and Chinook, all kinds of things, pidgin English kind of. And Seatco was their term for these mysterious tribe of Indians, giant Indians, that lived in the mountains. And by and large, we call that tribe Bigfoot today, in my opinion. They're the same thing. And it's just that back in the 1930s, before the 1930s, up till then, the general thought was that they were a tribe of people, mysterious giant people. They weren't animals. So that was kind of a modern view that came along later when, in the 50s mostly. But anyhow, Seatco is that group. There was a town once named Seatco, and it's on I-5 at exit 88. So, yes, but and there was a prison. The first prison in Washington Territory was named Seatco Prison, and it was right on the border of Indian land. So right where the white land ended, they put this prison right on the border and named it Seatco Prison. I don't know why, but, I just found that really interesting.
That's very interesting. So there was an article that I read years ago, and I can't find it online anymore. I'm sure it's out there. It was in the Oregonian, and it was about the mysterious Seatco tribe. Are you familiar with this article?
Yeah. If it's 1924, July 8th, 9th, 15th, all around there, like July of 1924, there's all Fred Beck and his adventure in Mount St. Helens with the Skookums, with the Mountain Devils. Yes. Fred Beck, one of my heroes, a big-time hero of mine. And once upon a time, I did a really deep dive into Fred and his experience and his whole story. I always found him to be like a really early guy that had a clue. Like he actually grasped the conceptual difficulties of the problem.
Interesting. The article that I'm talking about right now, I remember reading about how the neighboring Indian tribes that were interacting with Seatco would talk about how they had this horrible sense of humor, and they were also good trading partners, and it did a lot. It went a long way to humanize them, but it also put them in this totally different category. Like one day they were kind of savage, and the other day they were like happy-go-lucky. You know what I mean? And that was what was so interesting about that article. Is I felt like, oh wow, we're getting like characters here, you know. And throughout the process of A Flash of Beauty, we've really been trying to nail down the character or characters of Bigfoot, like who, you know, because I think the
Who
general
are
public
these
kind of has this
guys?
like, yeah, who are these guys? The general public is like, first of all, a lot of people we've talked to, like, they're like, well, you mean there's more than one Bigfoot? You know, that's the first thing. But we're just trying to figure out, you know, especially with different bands and different territories and stuff, is, yeah, who are they? What are they capable of? What kind of things that do they do that we do?
The answer to that is very complicated, believe it or not. I actually can envision answering it, but we don't have enough time.
I kind of thought you might say that.
Yeah. No, the thing about that article that struck me, and it's related to what you're talking about, is that what I realized later was that was one of the few times that we got a glimpse of Indian culture in an Oregonian newspaper article in the 1920s, because a lot of that was legit Indian culture. A lot of Northwest Indian tribes know something about this mysterious other tribe, and it gets, as you go down the rabbit hole, every tribe has a different view, and there's some overlapping things and there's some non-overlapping things. There's a whole culture of secrecy having to do with ceremonies that contact these beings. So, you know, I know these ceremonies exist, and I know that the tribes have a relationship with these beings. The Seatco tribe, many tribes have a relationship with this tribe. It functions differently in different tribes. There's just so many. Well, for an example, the I always want to call them the Chewbacca tribe, but they're the I can't think of it. Anyhow, there's a tribe in Montana that lives on Rocky Boy Reservation, and they have a hill just off the reservation named Hill 57. There are ceremonies that take place on Hill 57. The tribe itself has a secret religion that takes a lifetime to learn, and no outsiders can know it. I just know it exists. I don't know anything about it, but I know these things exist. And at the pyramid of their secret religion, Bigfoot is their greatest protector, and he is seen as a protector of the tribe. And this, you know, this is just because I know somebody who spent a lifetime in this religion, who actually opened up to me because we were, you know, obsessed with Bigfoot one day. So that kind of thing goes on at lots and lots of tribes. And the big man is what, you know, shorthand for what a lot of tribes call him. Once upon a time, the famed salmon champion, Billy Frank, who's kind of like god of Indian salmon champions here in the Northwest, he sent a call out to all the tribes to have come to him and have a meeting where everybody would share everything they knew about the big man. Each tribe would share what they knew about the big man in this meeting with Billy Frank. Now, I don't know if it actually happened or not. I've heard it did, but this is something that happened long ago before my time. But I've heard rumors of this, like once upon a time he did this. So, yeah, I mean, it's different. When you say Bigfoot, you're white in Indian country. Because everybody knows, oh, you're looking for Bigfoot? White guy or white woman. But either way, that's just like Indians aren't looking for Bigfoot in the same way we are. Their cultures are completely different about it. It has a place in their culture. It has and all the cultures are different, but there's a role in all the different cultures. It's just not my place to, be like some, looter and secondhander who tells their story. It's like their stories are not mine to tell. I know they exist though, and I know that there's a lot of different ceremonies that involve them, and a lot of different. They're not the only creatures either. That's the other thing, is that Bigfoot's just one of a huge zoo of strange beings from the Indian side, from looking at it from their culture,
Yeah, now you've got my attention. No, you had my attention before. But I'm just thinking, like, in terms of the news article that you and Brett were just referencing, and that journalist talking about Indian culture in the 20s and the relationship with Seatco, Sasquatch, Bigfoot, the big man. Kind of thinking, I'm more of just thinking out loud to myself about. I'm curious if these other regions, whether it's the Midwest, the South, the Northeast, if they embrace the stories and have the same curiosity in the way that I think of the Pacific Northwest as the home to Sasquatch, and I just wonder if these other regions embrace it the same way with their stories and history.
It's an interesting question, yes, that you pose. Now, others have asked that question. A woman named Gail Highpine, a Kootenai Indian, wrote an article ages and ages ago that's actually on the BFRO, and it came from one of my very first papers, strangely enough. And she asked that question in that paper, and she was an Indian, she went all over to all these different tribes, and she concluded that here in the Pacific Northwest, our Indians thought Bigfoot was a spiritual being that was a spirit. And in other tribes, as you got away from the Northwest, Bigfoot was more like, a flesh and blood, animal. I disagree with that. That was a long time ago that she wrote that. And I've had a 28-year career working for the tribes, and in the last 3 years, I've worked for 20 tribes. So all across the Midwest, it just so happens, including the Standing Rock Sioux, for example. And it's the same. All the tribes have a culture that is inherently different than white culture. I mean, I hate to say the totally most obvious thing, but the Sioux teach that Bigfoot is both flesh and blood and spirit. They teach it's both. Each tribe teaches it in a different way. Each tribe is trying to explain the reality that they encounter in a different way, and they all have the Nez Perce, for example. Bigfoot is their creation story. And when Bigfoot and Coyote get into a fight, Coyote rips Bigfoot apart, and from each piece of his body, he creates a tribe in the Northwest. Well, actually, in America, across Turtle Island. From the heart, he creates the Nez Perce. But from like the arm, he creates the Sioux, and the leg, he creates the Crow. And they have this whole creation myth that's all involved with Bigfoot. And when you are maybe interrogating a Nez Perce elder, theoretically, what happens about that is, and you go, hey, was that Bigfoot? Was that Bigfoot? Was the monster Bigfoot? And they'll just say, there's a connection. So you're like, oh, okay, all right, okay. So, but take the famous one is Vancouver Island, where you've got the Waka Waka, as they're known now. And like, there's a bunch of them on the internet, Thomas Sewitt, it's like weird for me because that tribe has a secret wild man society that Franz Boas talked about 100 years ago in his early works. And they're the Hamatsa. And if you're in the Hamatsa, you are allowed to have the Zanukwa as the bottommost element of your totem pole. The most significant spot on a totem pole is the bottom. You read them upside down, going from bottom to top in terms of importance. So that's how you can identify a member of the Hamatsa in the villages and things like that. And it's hereditary. It's a hereditary clan thing. So Thomas Sewitt bestowed Thomas Sewitt. And the current Thomas Sewitt is actually like this really active Bigfoot guy. And I'm like, and I consider him sort of an acquaintance, maybe even a little bit of a friend, and I'm stunned that he didn't live up to my imagination and dreams of what the chief of the Hamatsa was supposed to know about Bigfoot. My point overall is that all the different tribes have like a completely different role for Bigfoot in their culture. And all the tribes have different cultures. You can't generalize, really. It turns out that you can't even generalize in a tribe at all, because all the tribes vociferously disagree with each other within the tribe. And there's tons of factions, and politics are by family, and it's really interesting, the whole Western civilization viewpoint that there is a tribe, because really there were villages, and that was kind of the organizational unit. And you can look at linguistic commonalities, and you can look at genetic tribal commonalities and things like that, or cultural, but it was a lot messier than we in the highly categorized West would like. It was a mess. Every village had ambassadors from every other tribe. So when Lewis and Clark got here and saw a village and they said, oh, that's a Cowlitz village, there were like tribal members from like all the other tribes in the area hanging out there at that village at that time. And actually here it was the same at Fort Vancouver, which was the big trading post. Cree, Klickitat, Chinook, and Cowlitz moved in and just hung around the fort, and they just built teepees all around the fort and had like an endless market and party going on around the fort all the time. But it was just a mixture of views of pardon me, the big man, as we could say, because all those tribes also have like their own religion or whatever about Bigfoot, their own stories. And within a tribe, I'm sorry if I keep going on, but like within a tribe, there are things called longhouses. And especially here in the plateau tribes along the river, you are a member of a longhouse. And so within the tribe is balkanized into many, many longhouses. Or you're not even a member of a longhouse, you're a member of some other group in the tribe. So, but the longhouses are the owners of Bigfoot stories, and they don't share, and it's proprietary. So each longhouse has its own knowledge silo amongst that longhouse's members. Outside of that, no, they don't even share within the tribe. In some strange cases, tribal members are under far less pressure when it comes to sharing information with some white guy outside of the tribe than anybody inside of the tribe. So there's rivalries going on between all the longhouses, particularly attached to Bigfoot stories. So you really are, like really within a tribe, the knowledge about Bigfoot varies incredibly from individual to individual. And some know something and some don't. Some think they do. I mean, it's just like a microcosm of the rest of us. Most everybody has no idea what's going on. People like me can have a theory and throw it on the bonfire, burn it up. We're ready to go. But in general, there's a whole different way of thinking about it because they understand they don't have to fit it into an existing scientific framework to determine if it's true or not. That is not the first step for them when it comes to determining if something is true. Their experience is what tells them if it's true or not. And what I've found is that when Indian children are young, if they're raised in the way that Indian children have been raised here for a long time, they're starting at about age 6, they're sent on a vision quest up in the mountains, just go meet their spirit animal or their spirit guide or whatever you want to call it. It's a vision quest. And kids go up there over and over again until they're 11. Their parents send them up there. The parents arm them with what to expect a little bit. And they say, look for this, look for that. They do this. And here in Western civilization, we think, wow, that's a nice, superstitious thing. That's kind of cool. Yeah, that's nice that, they're, doing their old superstitious stuff. Actually, in my humble opinion, no, what is going on is they're meeting Bigfoot for the first time because the spirits they meet are the same people. They're the same Seatco tribe. They're basically meeting the Seatco tribe as children. And they learn about the existence of interdimensional animals and people at a young age from direct experience. We here in the West, we don't. We go, what do you mean, spirit? But most Indian children actually, through direct experience, realize spirits are real at a young age. And a lot of times they engage in ceremonies where the shaman is actually talking to the great turtle or something like this, which is supposedly America, North America. And the children are exposed to this at a really young age. So their entire viewpoint about whether or not spirits exist is completely different than ours. Like, they don't have the same questions that we have. They're just like, no, that's obvious. Everybody runs into the little people. Everybody runs into, we all know it's there. So strangely enough, your basic Indian person will assume Bigfoot exists even if he's never seen it. Whereas your basic white person will assume it doesn't exist if they've never seen it. And that's kind of cultural difference. It's really a cultural difference that you're looking at. In their culture, they exist, and they argue about whether or not they exist as well. You know, it's not black and white. I mean, once you know, if you get 10 Indians together, you'll get 11 opinions. So you'll just never know, man. You'll just, everybody's an individual. Sorry.
Quick question, Henry. So you were talking about, we didn't have a lot of time to get into this in the documentary, but at one point you were talking about the unique situation that you were in when you worked with these tribes, that you were actually able to see some things, being that you were a white guy, in other words, you were actually able to see some things that ordinarily would not be shared. Can you briefly talk about some of that stuff
Sure.
that they shared
a little
with you?
bit. Yeah. Because, see, I'm a mutt. I'm not enough Indian to be an Indian. I can't be an enrolled Indian. But I have 4 tribes in me, and my family's been in America since Captain John Smith. I come from that DNA line of the Captain John Smith bunch that went and wound up at Jamestown, right? So I'm part Indian, and I never really made a big deal about it. I'm totally a white guy, but a tribe evaluates you based on character and your contribution to the tribe. And so you're evaluated by a tribe in terms of what your character is and what have you contributed to the tribe? Like, what have you done for real? And so over time, the 28 years I worked for the tribes, I kind of won them over slowly through just being myself. And I'm a useful character I have a strange collection of skill sets that the tribes found very useful. And I was able to actually make some real contributions to the tribes. And so that's what opened the door, is when they saw that I was for real trying to I was a warrior for them. After I went to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in 2 cases where I sued the feds and I won, but I was just part of a team. I was one of 6 people that sued the feds. The tribes trusted me. The tribes trusted me because they got to know me and they got to know my character and they saw my contributions. And so they really trusted me they still do, some of them, because they know me. And I could show off, but I'd rather not. Here's an example of something, okay? My world, a little vignette. I was having a meeting at our police headquarters in Hood River because the tribes, I was working for Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission at the time, and they have a police force that does fish and game stuff for tribal people, like the other side of the equation, right? And so they have this great meeting room, and I went out there to have this meeting room. And in my time, once I won these 2 cases in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, I was untouchable for about 8 years. And the feds were afraid of me, and anything I asked for, I would get. And so if I wanted more funding for my project, I'd just get it. And I knew this. I knew that I had cowed them temporarily, and I could just get everything I wanted. So I was running a project. I had been given a blank piece of paper, and the tribes told me, you have $7 million in a bank account. Write a proposal to access those funds. And so that was my project. And I created this thing called the Intertribal Monitoring Data Project, which is a new institution that lived on. I created an institution that lives on without me, a giant monster in the bureaucracy. That's what I did when I had a blank piece of paper. So my thing was focused on saving salmon. My thing was, I'm going to save this. I'm going to conserve the salmon, Columbia River, blah, blah, blah. Man, I'm just like 28 years I dedicated my life to fighting for the salmon, for the tribes, so the tribes could eat them. Okay. Yeah. But that was part of it. Humans are one of the predators of fish. So I got to a point with where I was welcome. It was like I was an Indian. It was like I'd be in the middle of the res, and all the other white people would leave, and then suddenly all the Indians would start talking as if there were no white people there anymore. And that happened to me a lot. And so, but they also knew me and they worked me. So the background of this story, what I'm trying to tell you, this is all a Bigfoot story. I'm sorry, this is the preamble. So I'm sitting in this meeting room, and a guy comes in with a cell phone, one of the police officers, and he's filmed Bigfoot swimming across the Columbia River. And he passes the cell phone around to all of us, and we all look at it, and he only refers to him as him, period, him. And so we're all looking. I mean, it's an incredible. He's doing the Australian crawl, by the way, right? So we all look, and we all look 2 or 3 times. We watch this. It's like a 20, 30-second video, and we all watch it. We're all, wow. As soon as we all watch it about 3 times, he deletes it. We never tell anybody else. And that's how it goes in Indian country. And that happened, more than once, let us say. And so there are many times, it got to a point where when I had a Bigfoot sighting, I just deleted it. If I had a film, I was like, screw it. I don't want those white people to know. Screw that, They don't know what the hell's going on with Bigfoot anyhow. So, sorry, I was getting imperious and arrogant. I didn't mean that. Not being an Indian, but I shared this because I was in natural resources management, and we did not like to share information about deer and elk and wildlife with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. They would abuse the data a lot of times. So we had to have these carefully negotiated data exchanges. And they would say things all the time like, well, there are no lynx in Washington. There's no grizzly bears in Washington. There's no wolverines in Washington. And all of us in the tribal world knew perfectly well there were. And we would not argue with them. We would say, right, yeah, they went extinct. What was that, 1958? Yeah, right. Okay, fine. And so I've been doing that for 28 years where I know a lot of animals that are here still that Oregon and Washington state at the state level just deny they exist. They're like, no, they went extinct. No, there's none of them. No. And so that's just regular animals. When it gets to all the spirit animals, forget it. Nobody's talking. That's the general thing. So, yeah, here's an interesting anecdote. When all the white people would leave and they would start talking as if there was no white person there, they would talk about Bigfoot and UFOs as like almost the dominant topic. So whenever you leave Indians alone to themselves out in the middle of the desert, they're talking Bigfoot and UFOs privately.
Interesting.
Henry, I have a quick question for you. Going back to the deleting of the footage there, that you're in Simpatico and said yourself that you've deleted footage before. I want to talk to you a little bit about that and your perspective on that. Early on, when I started looking into this, people talked about the Bigfoot curse, and the Bigfoot curse is kind of up to you what you make of it. But what I've come to realize is the Bigfoot curse is all about proof. And the only proof you're really going to get is kind of this distorted image of yourself at the end of the day of what you've become looking into the shadow world. So when you say that you would delete, a crystal clear, let's say 4K image off of your phone, or what you described crossing the Columbia River Gorge, talk to me about that. Tell me about your perspective on why he deleted it, why you deleted it, and what maybe if you have some advice to future researchers or people that have proof.
Well, that's a real can of worms, Tobe. But the short form is, do you know what the Kardashev civilization scale is, you guys? Russian scientists.
No, I think you know more than I've ever known.
So this guy, Kardashev, came up with a way to rank civilizations into types, type 1, type 2, type 3, based on the energy that they use. Type 1 uses all the energy available on the planet. Type 2, all the energy available from the sun. Type 3, all the energy available in the galaxy. So that was his original thing. And we're type 0. We're like so primitive. We're like ridiculous. Anyhow, people have added on to his scale, and they've gone up to type 7, which is a civilization that can get energy from the fabric of space-time, that can access the vacuum and actually access the virtual particles that reality is made from. And this is a Kardashev type 7 civilization. Space and time don't mean anything to them anymore. It's just irrelevant. They can go anywhere at any time instantaneously. Think of something like Q from Star Trek, right? So that's my opinion of what the Seatco are. They're a Kardashev level type 7 civilization that's homegrown. They came from here. And they come from that mysterious portion of our history where we have like maybe 10, 12,000 years of written history or evidence of history, civilization. I don't know, 30,000 maybe. And we're like 215,000 years old as a species. So what happened for the first 150,000 years? What was going on, right? So it seems like they come from that time. They come from our first 150,000 years, and they're super advanced. Like, that's what the problem is. There is no paranormal. It's technology that's so advanced it looks like magic to you. So people go, oh, paranormal. That's because you're so primitive, so freaking primitive. And so, yes, when it comes to cameras, I believe that, and all of this, they show you what they want you to see. Whether or not you have a camera in your hand, it has no bearing on the matter. It is, they are in control of what you see period. They are so advanced. And what's weird about it is they're like super scientist hillbillies, because everybody also, like, they wallow in their creatureliness. They're like, yeah, man, I'm a rank creature. Let's fuck. I mean, they're like, really, they're humans in that way. They're people, but they just happen to be so super scientist advanced. So anyhow, given this context of my personal opinion of what we're actually looking at, that's why I kind of think, like, with cameras and things, I'm so whatever, like, if you get a picture, they let you, great, but they can stop your camera with a thought. They can actually just, with one thought, just burp your camera, whatever. They can do that. They can actually change matter. They're on that level of civilization. They can shapeshift, but for them, it's actually technology. They can go faster than light, but it's technology. They really have it down. They're so advanced. One of the mysteries for me is that I wonder how, well, let's just say, yeah, like, that has consequences. Because, yeah, you can definitely get like a heavy, well, my personal contact with them in terms of character is they joke around a lot, and they're horny dogs. I mean, they're horny and they joke. And so that's very person-like, that's not like Mr. Advanced, space brain. That's like, what's wrong? But no, they like, it's a paradox. They encompass that paradox. That's how I see it. So anyhow, that's what informs my opinion about things like that. That's basically what's informing it. Well, part of it. That's a part of the picture.
I mean, there's a lot more that I want to get into regarding your answer there, Henry, but in the last 5 minutes that we have here, I don't want to gloss over the possibility that I thought I heard you mention last time I was with you, that you're maybe squaring away a new book. Is that
Yeah, I'm
in the
almost
writing?
done. I'm almost
Okay.
done. Yeah, yes, I have figured out how Einstein's general relativity explains Bigfoot. And I realize that I have a whole new Bigfoot theory to lay out on the bonfire for everybody to burn up and attack and have their way with. But it's, yes, relativity, general relativity as it applies to biology. So, like, I've really gotten, that's what 3 years of being in a COVID room alone have done to me, man. I'm like, whoa, I see it all now. It's general relativity and Bigfoot. Yeah, it's all there. But, yeah, and the other thing is that I figured out how to sort of make peace with the tribes, because I do know, like, a lot of stuff's been shared with me that I really have to think about each and everything. Go, should I ever share this with anyone? Should I really? Should anyone really? Should I ever say this? Should I take this to the grave or not? So I'm like, and I've found, I think, my way through that, so I can sort of describe how this Bigfoot thing sits between the cultures. It's on the Western civilization side, and it's on the tribal side, and it's a different thing that we're talking about. We're not talking about exactly the same thing. Everybody knows who you mean when you say Bigfoot, but it's a different thing, Yeah, the big man. Yeah, and there's there's a general I don't know. I never got to the end of that other dumb story that I spaced out on. maybe I should take my last minute and finish it. So
Yeah, go ahead.
they were trying to get me to fund a microwave link from Hood River to the police station way up on the Yakima Res. And they figured I'd go for it because I would have to build a microwave relay link over the top of Signal Peak, which, if you're Yakima, you know that Signal Peak is where all the serious tribal ceremonies go down in the winter ceremony. And so that to me was like the goal of life, is to get into the closed western part of the Yakima reservation where only Yakima tribes people are allowed, and then to be allowed to actually go to Signal Peak within that and build a microwave tower on top of it. And I was like, whoa, but then I turned it down because I said, no, I'm sorry, that doesn't have anything to do with salmon. I can't help you, Mr. Policeman. But I'm tempted, and they knew I'd be tempted because they dangled it. They were like, we know you want to get on Signal Peak. We know. You know, and that was at that time when I could get all the money I wanted from the feds, basically by asking. So they were all like, oh man, come on, Henry, fund this. And I'm like, no, I'm sorry, man. You're not going to use my Bigfoot interest to get me to fund some cop thing. Sorry, man.
I don't know. The old Henry might have done it.
They were tricking me, man. Well, they're trying to. No, they knew my weaknesses. They know me. That's the thing. Is I was an open book because at work I could talk about Bigfoot. Hey, it wasn't a taboo subject. I could hang out with a bunch of world-class scientists and talk about Bigfoot. I was having a great time, really, because the guys I all worked with were just, way smarter than me.
Saying a lot. Brett, you got a question?
Sort of final thoughts that you might have to impart on folks out there whose minds have just been blown across the room. Other than that, I mean, there's so much here to kind of digest.
Yeah, Henry, where can people find more work? I mean, do you have a website? Can they find you somewhere? Can they approach you? Can people write you? How do they get in touch with you?
I'm on Facebook at the moment. No, I haven't got my media thing together at all. Really, I don't have any merch or anything or your website. Really, I had the beginnings of some ideas for some websites. Pardon me. I do have a website for all my music stuff, but yeah, Bigfoot is like new. Well, once again, declaring myself, playing my cards here in the Bigfoot arena has occurred, and I've been reticent from talking to people about Bigfoot for a really long time. So it's just sort of, it's I don't have anything worked out at all. I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing. Yeah. So yeah, they can find me on Facebook. They can find my email address, hjfranzoni3@gmail.com. But that's just about it right now. I've sort of downsized everything. They can go to buildabuzz2.com.
What is that email again, Henry?
jfranzoni3
at
Gmail.
So if anybody's interested in what we've spoken of over the last hour, now's your chance to dig in deeper. I hope that you do, because, I'll just be honest. And so much of this, Henry, you've been right, dead on. And, you didn't steer me in the wrong direction. I've only benefited by leaning in, off the edges of science, as Tom Powell would say. So I appreciate your words. And unless Jill, you have a question, or Brett, I appreciate your time, Henry, for coming on this show. And this won't be the last you've heard of us.
There's a lot more of Henry to be seen in the sequel, Flash of Beauty, Paranormal Bigfoot, which isn't really paranormal Bigfoot. It's just science we don't understand. So maybe we need to call it a Flash of Beauty, primitive humans trying to understand a spiritual being that we are just not ready for.
Well,
Maybe we
you
could put an asterisk up there or
it's
something
the
like
same Kardashev Type 7 civilization. When the tribes interact with it, the face they see is a different face than what we see. And we see one face of it and they see another face of it. But it's the same thing. It's they have more of a clue about who it is. And, we have less of a clue in general, in my opinion. That would be my final statement. Yes. Respect the Indian people because they do know more about it than you usually.
That's been my experience. All right, thank you, Henry, and stay close to your phone. We're gonna be in touch with you here soon.
Thanks,
Yep.
guys. Thanks for everything.
Thank you, Henry. Really appreciate it. There's so much more to talk about. But we appreciate your time tonight.
You have only touched the end of the iceberg, believe me.
All right, good talking to you.
Take care. Have a great evening.
You too.
This has been a Resonance Productions podcast. If you have questions, comments, or your own encounter story you would like to relay to the show, email us at bigfootrevealedpod@gmail.com. Also, if you're just discovering us, you can watch our documentary, A Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed, on most major video streaming platforms.